Stefan, thanks for taking the time this morning. We're excited to talk to you about some of the new developments on Lua, the Agent OS, and what we're shipping, what we're planning on the roadmap, and how we got here. So this will be a evolving story we tell over time, but we're excited to have the brains behind the operation here. So Stefan, you want to kick us off with your background, how we got to where we are with Lua, and just kind of the story of the company?
Awesome. Thanks, Curt. So Stefan Kruger, CTO, co-founder. I've been in the industry probably 2 decades now, mostly focusing on the Europe, Middle East, and an African continent. Spent the last 5 years at a payments business acquired by Stripe called Paystack. A lot of my time spent in informal markets, which I kind of think is a pro, right? Because you deal with incapable systems, broken systems. Like there's certain failure points in highly distributed systems you can never really anticipate until you hit the African market. So I spent a lot of time focusing on the foundational kind of formatting of it. Lua kind of came out through I think, the excitement, the hype of AI. But I think I got more excited about how do I apply AI to actually make a difference. I think there's a lot of hype out there. There's a lot of vaporware and fluff, people make a huge amount of money on these agentic systems, but how much of them actually make tangible difference? So that's kind of where we built it. Lua kind of started as the consumer-facing product. We were aggregating sales agents for other merchants, so on-demand food delivery, retail stores, etc. And the idea was to have a single point of entry called Lua as your personal assistant, and Lua being able to shop on your behalf. I think we very quickly learned that B2C is a super hard problem to solve, and it's hard to really dive down a specific vertical and focus because there's so much demand and so much need. So we very quickly realized that we've built, at that point, I think it was like 100 different agents out the market, and it became a rinse and repeat. If you build on-demand food delivery, there's a system you build, there's an infrastructure you build, there's a memory layer you build, there's a vectorization you build, there's downstream LLM routing you build, and it becomes a rinse and repeat. And we realized that the fundamental of where we're sitting now is not playing with the foundational models. There's massive companies out there, OpenAIs, that's spending billions on building out this kind of foundational layer. But an agent is like a human, right? It's got a brain, which we call the foundational model. It's got arms and legs, but they're still piping, and there's still things that needs to be able to interact with the real world. And that's where we kind of see Lua Fall kind of come in as being the fibers. So when we talk about big enterprises or big businesses around the world kind of implementing AI, they've already spent a huge amount of money on CRMs. They built processes around CRMs, ERPs, internal processes. And the last thing they want to do is kind of go, I've got to revamp everything internally to make this agentic experience work. Lua then becomes that abstraction layer which you can deploy anywhere inside your enterprise and connect to these existing systems to create this very smart, intelligent layer that help you automate processes. So we spend a lot of time looking at that. We've got developer tools out in the market. So we kind of focus on 3 very different areas. So self-serve. So if you've got a Shopify store, you can literally deploy an agent in 2 minutes to a few clicks. We do that with a few of these one-to-many distribution partners. And we have a kind of a middle layer, which I'm the most excited about, which is igniting developer agencies. So if we think about legacy web development agencies, etc., like how do we get them to build enterprise quality agency experiences for their customers, and actually make a living off it, and actually get these agents to do useful things in the market. And then finally, the last thing I kind of focus on is the enterprise side of things. So how do we step into large, legacy corporations and help them convert their agentic experience?
That's awesome, Stefan. Yeah, thank you for that. I think one thing that's interesting there, we talk about starting with B2C. A lot of startups talk about dog fooding their own product, but really it's kind of an afterthought. They build the product and then, they use it themselves, but we kind of flip that on its head, right? We built the product, solved a bunch of problems, and then realized the infrastructure is the real business that we're excited about. How has that kind of dog fooding as the entry point shaped how you built this versus maybe past startups?
Yeah, I think I think it was an important part of our journey, to be fair. Like, it was definitely a hard part, but it's a super important part because I think we were probably the first, AI infrastructures to actually build tangible agents in the market that has an impact. And the only really way to do that is spending time in a vertical. So we weren't just a bunch of engineers in the back office writing a framework, which we think was cool. Like, this framework was trial and tested in very hard markets to get to where it is. So we spent a lot of time thinking through that process. There's a lot of, when you think about agents isn't just you kind of trigger it, it does a whole bunch of stuff and has an output. You want the agent to be able to interact with the world based on variations of things. So, a consumer has a checkout basket. They add a product to the basket, but they never actually pay for the basket. So now you look at your agent system and go like, why did that happen? Like, how do I get the user to nudge it out? With our platform, you can actually attach a very smart job to it that in 2 hours from now, it goes back and it checks, okay, has the user actually checked out that basket? If they haven't, then let's nudge them. Let's see why they haven't. Let's do a survey. Did something go wrong in the agentic experience? So we spend a lot of time on how do you actually apply these agentic experiences to real world outcomes.
That's cool. I think there's a level of empathy for the customer because you were the customer for the better part of a year, right, before becoming the actual platform. It's kind of like the Slack story or some of those other startups that took that pivot into B2B and infrastructure. That those are the products with great user experience because they understand the user so much better than someone who started out as B2B. Another thing you mentioned I think is interesting from my non-technical perspective, I view the difference between just AI tools and agentic AI as kind of the interface of informal and formal processes. And so your story of coming up in the developing world in that informal economy strikes me as really interesting in that it's a world that really needed agentic AI maybe first, and so maybe you understood that use case differently than someone who's been surrounded by really robust API infrastructure in the US, for instance.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the reality is in these informal markets, we had to build a lot of these piping, which we call ourselves, to kind of get it going. I think where so there's two very different variations. I think that there's a world where you look at an N8N, which is a workflow manager, and it has a trigger, and you kind of drag and drop if this, then this, then send it onto an agent. We view the world in a very fundamentally different way. So if I kind of take the progression of AI, 12 months ago, workflows were relevant because the agentic, the reasoning models weren't really up to scratch to be able to reason around, I have this toolkit of tools. Like, when do I call what? Like, how do I do state management? How do I kind of follow these flows? So we invested a lot of time in the agentic experience, kind of going, how do we isolate this agent, give it real context, give it a set of tools, and set it free to actually make the right decisions and guide the users through these processes. I think in the developing world, unfortunately, the customers is not necessarily used to following a process from point A to point B. Like, they're going to jump in between. They're going to throw a curveball in. They're going to, switch from buying a phone to buying an Apple very quickly. So it's hard to keep adapting workflows around those. So we spend a lot of time thinking through how do we actually build these agents to critically think through these processes to get to the end of the goal.
It's interesting. Yeah, it almost ties into the dog fooding of there's a level of empathy for the consumer there for understanding not just who they are, but what state of mind they're in a given moment where you need to know whether they're looking to buy that phone or buy that Apple, because you're going to potentially send them to an Apple phone if you're mixing those two contexts.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, great. Let's transition into some of the features that were, already launched on Lua that we're really excited about, that we're getting good market feedback on. I think there's a lot of different things we're excited about. Maybe let's start with, since we're talking about users already, some of the user context and user sentiment analysis that we've rolled out as kind of a standard feature on the Lua platform.
Yeah. So I think the most crucial thing is, like, I think if you build any systems, whether it's, you know, a deterministic system or an agentic system, the most important things is be able to kind of know what is happening and when it's happening. So setting an agent free in the market is fair enough. You can drive a lot of traffic, but how do you actually know that agent is successful, and how do you make, you know, small incremental changes to make it better over time? So we evaluate a conversation every time a message comes and an agent responds. We evaluate things like user sentiments. You can literally look at a conversation and you can see the user started happy and they ended angry, which is an obvious indication that they're frustrated with the agent. So it's easy enough to kind of go in there and say, okay, I need to look at these conversations. The trend, you know, over the last 20 messages average of, you know, these last 1,000 users, there's upwards trending and they're getting frustrated. There's something you've got to change in the agent. So we try and evaluate as much as we can from an emotional perspective and how the user interacts, but also correctness. I think, you know, we live in a world where AI agents hallucinate. We spend a lot of time guard rating these agents not to hallucinate, but it's still inevitable, like things happen. So it's important for us to know trends over time and how do we actually introduce corrective behavior into these. So we do everything from sentiment analysis, which is more empathetical, looking at the user, how they're interacting, are they happy, are they sad, through to relevance controls. So was the agent's response relevant? Did they make up any factual data? Then we look at kind of purchasing or intent of a user. So has the user coming in just to, you know, chit chat, or has the user actually come in with an intent to purchase, or did the user come in with an intent to, you know, create a support ticket because they had a previous issue across it? So we've got dashboards that kind of create this. It's a starting point for us. We fundamentally believe insights into these agents and how they move and how they self-heal and self-regulate becomes super important. So for us, the next kind of 2 to 3 months is pretty much focusing on how do we get these agents to improve by themselves over time, which is a tall order in itself. If we think about contextual limits on some of these LLM models, like how much of the context can you actually inject into it? You know, prompt engineering can only kind of get you as far, but how do we add a little bit more scientific notion into adjusting these agents to get us to where we want the correct outcomes?
Right. And related to that, how do they self-improve and then self-report on their improvement? So you can see that trend and kind of see the driver behind that trend. So I think the focus on hallucination reduction and also reporting and improvement kind of all self-reinforce as well, where the user can see that trend in a way that they can't necessarily on other platforms.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the most complex problem for us is obviously we play in the abstraction space. So we've abstracted a lot of these complexities away for an everyday engineer, any day business to adopt AI. But how do we build these analytics and these viewpoints at an abstracted layer to suffice every business and every needs? So there's a lot of thinking we're kind of going into these things to get it to where we want it to ultimately be.
That's great. So something that's obviously very important to a lot of our clients, right, or to really every business in this day and age is data privacy, and then as part of that, user authentication. How do you make sure the right data is flowing to and from the right user? Can you talk about how we have thought about that at Lua and how we've built that out over time?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the early days, we solved what we call session control very early. So if a user comes in through a WhatsApp number, we've got a very tight integration with WhatsApp. We can identify that user as being the same. So we build a lot of primitives around the session. So as an engineer, I can store a whole bunch of kind of private data within that session that's attached to that user, and only that user can access. There's a secondary layer of authentication, which we see with digital banks, loan providers, etc., where there has to be a secondary validation of that user to a third-party system. So they'll use things like one-time pins. The agent sends a one-time pin, it authenticates with a third-party system. The third-party system then returns an authentication token. We store that data on the user session in an encrypted fashion. So next time a user comes, we know they're identified in a third-party system. We spend a lot of time thinking through the abstraction side and how do we make it easier for a lot more robust authentication. So we've got a layer called preprocessors. So you can think about it, a message or trigger kicks off. There's some sort of contextual message coming in, whether it be audio, voice, media, whatever the case is. you can pre-process and then do an authentication layer. I mean, to the core of actually doing, OAuth yourself or integrating into something like Firebase. So we have the flexibility of one, that first authentication within the session, identifying the user, the same user coming back again, and secondary, giving the ability for a lot more robust authentication on that side. In terms of data privacy and data security, it's something that we very early on implemented within our system. So we are SOC 2 ready, going through the compliance, ISO 27001, and then GDPR. So what that means is that we only present what we need to present to a downstream LLM from a user perspective. So personal identifiers like your national ID number, your passport number, we will very rarely pass down to an LLM unless there's business logic that needs to control some of those things. But that obviously sits within the business, and there has to be kind of review cycles through those. All data within our databases is encrypted, so we have dual factor authentication. So basically, a way to describe it is asymmetric keys. So we issue a private key to our partners. The agent uses a public key, and only that agent can decrypt data related to that partner and access that data within a session. So we make sure that internally, even if we get breached internally, no one can access the data unless they have the external keys to access the data. The second layer of it is that we hold context and we hold memory. So we don't rely or allow downstream LLMs to use your data for training material. We go through a very strict review in terms of who we onboard in terms of providers. We've got very strict guidance with Google, OpenAI, etc., to make sure that we actually comply to what they can use and what they can't use from that perspective.
That's great. I think the user authentication is an interesting example of one of the many and ever expanding skills we have on the Lua platform, which can run in pre-processors, but also in post-processors. Can you talk about some of those skills that you're really excited about, and how we're trying to expand that library, and then how the ability to use them in both post and pre-processing kind of empowers those skills?
Yeah, definitely. So instantly at Lua, so we've always had this notion of a skill, right? So as a human, you're going to teach that football as a skill, but a skill means you learn a set of tools and you improve a set of tools. So in our system, we look at it the same way. If an agent has the ability to issue a loan, for instance, the skill is a loan issuance, but inside that skill, there's things like, I need to get KYC information, I need to validate the KYC information, I need to go check the credit scoring, and then third, get a loan issuance, and then kind of get a loan agreement. So you can look at a skill as kind of a grouping of a specialized set of domain tools. What we've realized through that, and as I mentioned earlier, is that giving an agent a set of tools, giving a trigger, giving an output is not giving you the full agentic experience. Like, there has to be at a point in time events that has to happen. So payment processing happens asynchronously, like it can happen at a point in time. So if a user has to pay for a basket, the agent needs to at some point in time be aware of it. So you can create a webhook very simply with the same primitives. We've got jobs. So you can think about cron jobs. A cron job can kick off every day at 12, go do reporting on something. But we also have dynamic jobs. So within your tool that's based in a skill, you can set a job for a point in time. You can set it for every 5 minutes, you can set it for once. And that could be kind of going, well, like, we know that the user placed an order, like what's their trend over time. If every Wednesday they're ordering a cheeseburger, like we should know next Wednesday to send them an update before lunch. I'm kind of go, hey, do you want to get your pre-order in for another cheeseburger? So preemptively kind of getting the agent more involved to do active stuff. In terms of the post-processing side of things, so post-processing happens after the agent responded. And that's kind of what we find is our analytical playground. So very much, we've already got the built-in sentiment, the relevancy scoring we do on the agent's responses. But as a user, you might want to kind of do a little deeper dive into the conversations and build your own analytical suite out. So the post-processor gives you the ability to either pass it on to another LLM or to, some other third-party system, or even process it with your own code to get some of these evaluations out. So in the industry, we know things as evaluations, and that's exactly what that is. An evaluation is if I'm expecting a certain outcome, measure what the outcome from the agent was against my expectation, and give me an eval score. So same thing, sentiment analysis, relevant scoring, etc. You can all kind of handle in that post-processing section. So the way we kind of view it is that the agent is an encapsulation of a whole bunch of different primitives, and it allows engineers or non-engineers to be able to kind of bolt it on pre-processing, post-processing, and within that processing cycle, being able to kind of handle and build very custom experiences.
That's great. Well, we've talked a lot about what we already have. We've been shipping a lot of new features. I know a couple things we've been focused on recently is the rollout of voice, which we're super excited about. Do you want to talk about where we are with that today?
Yeah, definitely. I think multimodality, there's a lot kind of going out there. So how do I interact real time with an agent, either using video or voice? A lot of our use cases is WhatsApp calling, Facebook calling, taking over phone lines through SIPs and trunks. So I think where we are in the life cycle of AI and voice is still very immature. There's a lot of companies out there making leaps and bounds in terms of what this looks like. But I think for us, we still find voice interactions very robotic. So we want to be able to, and what we're focusing on is how do we actually build a lot more emotions? And so, if the agent's excited, how does it do it in a higher pitch in terms of the tone coming through? If the agent is sad, like how does it actually portray that empathy and that emotion through the conversation versus just being, we find a lot of people kind of phoning and being on an agent going, well, it's just the same repetitive stuff. So it should feel a lot more natural talking to an agent than what we currently have in the market. So there's a lot of kind of work we're doing around, do we do it kind of in a cascading form in terms of, voice to text, text to voice, trying different providers. How do we kind of switch between all of these, a lot more specialized models? Also playing a lot in the Middle Eastern market. I think Arabic is probably one of the toughest problems from a dialect perspective to solve, mostly because the variation between an Egyptian dialect, a Saudi dialect, and Dubai dialects are very different. And sometimes these dialects could come across and actually offend people. So there's specialized providers in markets which focus on like an Egyptian dialect. So making sure that we can actually dynamically give these like top of the market, top of the shelf dialects to our customers without having to deal with the complexity that they're trying to solve these things, is what we're focusing on in kind of the next 3 to 6 months.
That's a cool problem. What else have we rolled out recently that you're excited about?
So there's a lot going out around how do I personalize my agents without having too many or too much of a technical ability around it. So simple things, going through a conversation. So on Lua, you can log into your admin dashboard in the back office and look at a conversation. You can look at the user, you can look at the agent response. What we're trying to get to and focusing on is how do I actually dynamically look at a message and give it a thumbs up and say, actually, I didn't like this for the response to the agent. Tell the agent why you didn't like the response, and automatically it kind of heals itself and solves itself in that process. So we've rolled out a version of that which gives you the ability to adjust your agent persona through very quick and simple interfaces. We've spent a lot of time on logging and monitoring for the agents. So as an engineer, I want to know the agent called tool X, what was the latency on that tool call because they called a third-party system? What was the failure rate on some of those things? Where are some of the breakages within the tool call cycles? Gosh, there's so many things that's been rolled out. I'm trying to top of mind think through some of them. I think those are some of the bigger, chunkier ones we've recently rolled out. As I mentioned earlier, last week we rolled out the pre-process, post-processes, webhooks, the jobs, dynamic job creations. Yep.
That's awesome. Yeah, so a lot of pre-processing, voice, new analytical capabilities, abilities for non-technical users to interact more easily with the platform. Something I've certainly benefited from myself. And yeah, a lot of exciting features rolling out. So we've talked a little bit about how we're thinking about the product roadmap already, how we're thinking about analytics and voice over the next 3 or 6 months. How are you thinking about expanding that, but also being disciplined about, solving specific client needs, specific platform needs, but also, being really tight to the vision of the platform?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of threefold for us. So one is we want to enable the world to interact with the agent on multiple platforms. At the moment, we cover things like WhatsApp, Instagram. There's a whole range of things, but there's probably around 30 or 40 different ones out there, which we still have on backlog, which we're going to focus on. And the idea is to have a unified agent experience, whether your customer talks to you through Telegram or talks to you through Instagram. The tone, the UX, the UI, we want consistency in that, but also abstract the complexity away from everyone building on Lua. Like, you shouldn't have to go understand, like, what does the WhatsApp template messages look like, and how do I interact with these template messages? How do I show a catalog on all these variations? The ideal goal would for you as a Lua on the Lua platform to be able with 2 or 3 very quick interactions on the admin dashboard to link that channel and expose your agent to the rest of the world. So that's the one silo we're focusing on. The second silo is how do we build a lot more insightful views, but dynamic insightful views into this world of an agent. So I want to have an agent deployed out that is a barista and sells coffee online through WhatsApp calls or WhatsApp. Every morning, I want to be able to see what has the agent done well, where has it failed, and how did it correct itself. And I should be able to give it KPIs. I should be able to go, actually, you know what, I want you to be able to go onto Meta and do outbound ads, give me 100 leads and try and convert 20 of those leads. If you can't, tell me why you can't and try and solve those problems. So as an operator of these agents, I want to be able to really be able to measure the impact that this agent has. So there's a lot of thinking going, and that's on the product roadmap. And the last one is how do we expose the data in a more dynamic way for anyone to access within the organization? So it's nifty enough that we give you a bunch of dashboards, but what if you want to build a lot more deeper trends into that? Because the reality is no one's going to know your business better than you know your business. So how do we expose those data trends for you to be able to dynamically query at any point in time? So a lot of kind of like, it seems very hypothetical and a lot more academic, which it is. But those are kind of what we're focusing on the product roadmap side of things.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, those academic problems lead to real world customer experience. And so it's awesome that we're working on both of those sides. Well, thanks for your time, Stefan. You've probably spent too much time with marketing this morning and should get back to improving the product, but I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Curt. I appreciate it.